It turned out he'd had a burst aortic aneurysm in his abdomen, and he'd lost so much blood, and they put him in an induced coma for 6 weeks.
I want to move and talk about in 2002 when he had the hospitalization, and this was quite serious. And go ahead and tell me what happened to him.
So Lightfoot was performing, his typical 60, 70, 80 shows a year in 2002, and strangely enough, ironically enough, he was in his hometown of Orillia, about to do a performance in the Opera House there in Orillia, and he was having stomach pains, and he didn't know what it was. But I think in his typical manner of the show must go on, he just popped a couple of painkillers, and drove up to Orillia himself with his guitars in the trunk, and in his Oldsmobile, and he got to the Opera House in the afternoon, and he just went straight to the dressing room. The band was already on stage tuning up. This is for the sound check in the afternoon, and he was in the dressing room, and he suddenly collapsed on the floor. The pain just overwhelmed him, and I tell the story of how his sister Beverly, who lived nearby and was very involved in her brother's career for many years, come to the Opera House to see her brother and ask the band, well, where is he? And they told him, well, he's in the dressing room. So she went to the dressing room, found him lying face down on the floor, and realized he was in trouble, and got one of the band members to help her get him to the local hospital. And it turned out he'd had a burst aortic aneurysm in his abdomen, and he'd lost so much blood, and the hospital in Orillia tried their best to deal with the issue, but in the end they didn't have the medical expertise, and he had to be airlifted to the city of Hamilton, which was, I guess, the nearest major hospital that had that kind of surgical team that could deal with the attention he needed. And they put him in an induced coma for 6 weeks while they did all this extensive surgical repair on him. And the world very nearly lost one of its best singer-songwriters. I mean, he came so close to dying, and one of the doctors just kind of performed miracles in terms of the surgery he performed, and Lightfoot. I think the doctor also said it was a testament to Lightfoot's condition, his physical condition and strength, because he's been a gym rat for years and years and years, doing aerobic workouts, and used to be a runner. Anyway, he pulled through it remarkably, and believe it or not, was back up and performing, by 2004. And he gave a special concert for the hospital staff, a fundraiser for the hospital, as a way of thanking them for saving his life. And so that was in 2004. And a year later, he was on stage at a big event here for African famine relief. It was an event that was actually held in cities all over the world called Live 8. And, he was there on stage performing solo in front of, thousands and thousands of people. So, I mean, make that kind of a recovery in just 3 years, and to be performing on that big a stage in that short period of time is, again, a real testament to his comeback.
Did that episode alter his voice, or was it something else? Because he seems to have lost his baritone range to an extent.
Yeah, I think because he with that surgical procedure, he had a tracheotomy, and I think the tracheotomy did cause him to lose some of his timbre. I think his range, and certainly because of the the surgery on his abdomen, I think he also lost a lot of abdominal strength. So in terms of projecting his voice, but because he's such a, because he lives for the stage and because he's such a perfectionist, he has worked so hard to try and get back his vocal power, and he's done a lot of rehab to regain that strength. And I think now as well, I think he's projecting better. I noticed it early on, in his recovery that in his concerts his voice was, it was on the weak side. But oh my goodness, he has done such a remarkable job of working himself back up to being performance fit, and his vocal power, while not back to his peak in the 70s or 80s. It's certainly come a long ways back from his health crisis.
Yeah. It was frustrating to me being here in the States. I mean, as a huge Gordon Lightfoot fan, I was glued to this news, and yet it wasn't getting the same kind of play down here as I'm sure it was up there. And so I was just looking, on a daily basis to find updates, and it was a bit hard to find down here. Yeah,
well, I mean, it was, like I say, it was touch and go, and certainly in the Canadian media, it was big news. The funny sort of thing, Robert, is that he pulled out of that and recovered, and then in 2000 and I think it was 2008. No, sorry, in 2010, there was a false report that he had died. It turned out to be a hoax, but it was reported on the radio in Canada and then sort of went viral. And so he almost died in 2002, and then he was reported to have died falsely in 2010. So we in Canada have we've come close to losing him twice, once real and once made up.
The Gordon Lightfoot watch.
Yeah.
Good. Hey, what's on your agenda? I'm curious what you're working on next.
Well, I'm doing a lot of work with on documenting and having the music history of Toronto celebrated and recognized. I mean, my first book, Robert, was called Before the Gold Rush, and it was really all about the Yonge Street and Yorkville music scenes in the 1960s. And all the great talent that came out of that period. Toronto, like a lot of major cities, has this rich music history, but we're losing a lot of the actual physical buildings. The clubs, the coffee houses are disappearing. It seems to be all about real estate and condominiums and this sort of mad rush to basically build higher and higher. And so before all of these places disappear, and some of them already have, and before the artists associated with those venues are no longer with us, I get that history recognized, just because I believe that it shouldn't be forgotten that that Toronto has had this phenomenal period of musical activity. I'm doing that while sort of starting to putter along on future writing projects, book projects. But the Lightfoot project has certainly dominated, my time for probably a good 10 years now.
You really started this 10 years ago? I'm wondering, when did the interviews with Gordon actually start? Was that long ago?
No, I think I've interviewed him because I was the music critic at Maclean's magazine, which is like Canada's Time or Newsweek. I was a music critic there for 20 years, and then I wrote a couple of books, and then I made a series of documentaries for national television here on the history of Canadian music. So that's what occupied me right up until the time I got involved with Gordon on the idea of a book, and it went through a bit of a metamorphosis, because initially Gordon was comfortable with the idea of doing a coffee table book with me, where and it was his idea, like, that we should do something. And he said, well, I've got all these photographs. There's tons of memorabilia. What about a book with, for the fans that has lots of images, lots of photos, and just a little bit of text to accompany it? I said, sounds great. We pitched that. Publishers loved the idea because there hadn't been anything on Gordon, but they said, we don't want that book first. We want a memoir, a first-person memoir. And so Gordon had to get his head around that idea. And then what happened is, I think he realized it was going to be too big a time commitment on his part, with me being his ghostwriter. So he said, Nick, you've got enough material from me. Why don't you just go ahead and write the book yourself? So he essentially gave me his blessing to pursue the biography that I've ultimately completed. And I think it speaks a lot. Again, I keep talking about his character, but I think it speaks a lot about who Gordon Lightfoot is, that he entrusted me to tell a story. He didn't ask for approval on the manuscript. He didn't even see the manuscript before the book came out.
Wow!
And for which I'm very grateful. I mean, he could have, and that might have delayed things. But I think he also realized that it's time. That his fans have been waiting a long time for a proper book on him, and so he just sort of, he gave me his blessing, but he also opened doors for me. He introduced me to, he told his band members, his family, his friends, to talk to me if I called, and so I was able to get interviews with a lot of his inner circle, which was, fantastic because, as much as I got him to open up, there were things, that I still needed more detail or more other perspectives on. So by being able to speak to, those close to him, it really helped to round out the portrait.